Rule number 2 is my rule, which is you can't play any bullshit. Hey guys, it's Nate from the 80/20 Drummer, and welcome back for episode 2 of the How to Play More Like Mark series. As you may know, I'm covering the Now vs. Now tune 7 Ways, which is the top internet result for Mark Guiliana solo. So, as an adjunct to that, I'm doing these lessons of the week. I do one every week for you guys. I decided to delve into what I'm doing to learn the tune, and more specifically, not necessarily how to sound more like Mark, but how to take some of the tools that Mark practiced to make us sound better. So in the last episode about this, we covered a bunch of stuff about the meters of the tune, the different forms of 7, and some of the structures of the beats that you guys can start to work on and loop to make it better. And in this episode, we're going to hit the big enchilada, which is the solo. So the operative question is really 2 questions. The first is, how do you play a decent solo over the tune? And the second question is, why does Mark sound better than we do? So to begin to answer the first question, we're just going to assume that you got a call from Jason Linder with 5 days notice, and you need to sub for Mark in a recording session or on a tour. And you need to learn the bare minimum to be able to sound decent on the tune 7 Ways, and on the solo section. So the first thing you would do is exactly what I did, is just understand the song structure. And again, we covered a bunch about the rest of the song in episode 1, but now let's take a look at the solo section. There are a lot of different flavors of 7 in this tune, and the solo section spools out over kind of a 7-2, or a 7-4 if you think about the 16th note as the operative subdivision. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a little bit tricky and counterintuitive. So if I were learning this, the very first thing I would do is, if I had access to a recording, I would simply make a loop and play along with the loop of the solo section, just making sure I hit all of the resolution points again and again. Once I had it a little bit in my head, I would turn off the recording and turn on the metronome and start trying to play it from memory. Okay, once I have the structure of that vamp firmly in mind, I'm going to give you guys a couple of minimum effective beats to practice just different subdivisions and getting around the kit over this vamp. So the first I'm going to give you is in 16th notes. And I'm going to do a variation of this using the hi-hat as a home base, where I'm bouncing off the hats and using the snare as an accent option. Next, I'm going to give you a sextuplet sort of subdivision minimum effective beat. Again, starting with, based on the snare drum. And then with the plan B that's based on the hi-hats. The intention is definitely not that you play these verbatim, but that you sort of get it in your muscles to know what it feels like to play 16ths and sextuplets over this vamp, and that eventually you use a thing that I call the looping exercise to add variation, which I'll cover later. So if you started there and simply orchestrated these ideas a little bit, you would be able to come in on a day's notice and play a halfway decent solo over that tune, assuming you knew your way around the drum kit. Now let's delve into the second question. Why does Mark sound better than me? To answer that question, I actually did a bunch of research and listened to a bunch of different solos that Mark did over this tune. And I discovered one recording of a clinic Mark did where he himself discussed why he plays solos well. I'm going to give you 3 reasons in this lesson, 2 of which overlap with Mark's clinic. The first is mine. It's micro time. The second is what Mark calls changing rate, but we can think about it as just subdivision changes. And the third is another concept that I speak about in a lot of my videos, which is orchestration. Okay, micro time. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I'm like a broken record about this. But micro time means that your brain is one order of subdivision ahead of what your hands are doing. And what this allows you to do is to choose to be precise or imprecise. Enough talking, let me show you how I would practice this. First in kind of a what I would do method, and then slowed down a little bit. So you're going to put the metronome on 30-second notes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Notice how I have the accent of the metronome on the 30-second note upbeat every 2 beats. And why does microtime matter so much? When you see a great player like Mark Guiliana or Eric Harland or Ari Honig, and they have a certain effervescence to their feel, the reason why is microtime. It's because there's an energy and a precision to where they place their notes, even if it has a human feel. And leave it to yours truly to describe human feel in about the nerdiest way possible.
Let me demonstrate the microtime at a slightly slower tempo.
4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1.
You're looping simple versions of beats that emphasize the offbeats and the resolution points. You can set certain parameters for yourself, like rim shots or no rim shots, which surfaces you want to use, etc. We'll talk about that more later. Okay, now let's go on to number 2, changing rate or changing subdivisions. To practice this, there are a couple ways to do it, but you want to set the metronome on the lowest common denominator, so we're just going to set it on quarters for now. The most simple way I practice this is, again, with a looping exercise, where I'll do 1 bar of sixteenths and 1 bar of sextuplets.
Here I'm looping just the second bar of the vamp. I'll start with the 16th and sextuplet templates we learned earlier. Now I'll switch immediately and do 1 phrase in sextuplets. So here's the crux of the looping exercise. Now I add just 1 variation to each side. I'm working on subdivision, but I'm also working on the 3rd item and the 2nd item from Mark's clinic, orchestration. When the sticking's logical, I throw in notes on the floor tone. After 5 to 10 minutes, I'll add another variation. This is another orchestration variation, allowing me to continue my sticking from the floor tone to the hats. Now the 4th variation, adding some rim shots. And finally the 5th, orchestrating to some high and low toms.
I'm fast-tracking a bunch of variations for demonstration purposes, but in real life you'd spend 5 to 10 minutes on each one and spend 45 minutes to an hour on this whole exercise. It's perfectly valid to try and fail at this stuff because each loop gives you 5 to 10 minutes to work out the kinks. Okay, now things get a little more difficult. We're going to take a single bar and cut it in half, and do half of it with sixteenths and half of it with sextuplet-based subdivision. And rather than try to create loops from scratch, I'm basically just improvising here simply to demonstrate for you guys what this looks like. This is supposed to be difficult at this point. We're not trying to play a mediocre solo over this. We're trying to really use it to up-level our playing. Next, I'm going to improvise a little bit with orchestration. And you can have a few defined parameters when you do that. You can define your rate of subdivision. You can define which surfaces and which articulations. So for instance, you could say, I'm only going to play the snare drum, the kick drum, and the hats, but I'm going to allow rim shots. In this demonstration, I'm basically allowing every articulation, but I'm trying to orchestrate around the kit. Alright, and now on to the most difficult part of this. Just play. And the reason this may be different from improvisation as you thought about it before is that a lot of us will just mindly throw our hands around the kit and hope we come out in the right spot. And the difference between the players we love to watch and us is that although they also are playing by instinct, their muscle memory is much more deeply ingrained. And I'm going to invoke an exercise that Ari Honig likes to do, which is theme and variation. And it's different from looping because it is a stream of consciousness improvisation. But essentially it means you start with an idea, and then you play variations on that idea. And the only rules are, whatever you play, you need to make it work. So even if you make a mistake, you can't stop, you have to continue. And rule number 2 is my rule, which is you can't play any bullshit. Everything you play has to be something you heard. If I stop you and ask you to sing it, you should be able to sing what idea you were trying to do. As I say, eventually you'll be playing on a more instinctive level, but before that you need to get your bad habits out. So we need to train you to have your brain ahead of your hands, which is something that I call upload speed. Finally, I would turn the song back on and try to forget everything I just learned and just play. And you may need a few takes to do that. I would repeat this every day for a week, and if you don't see a dramatic difference in your soloing, pretty much no matter what your level, as long as you can find your way around a set of drums, I'll be astonished. Anyway, this was maybe the heaviest lift I've ever done in a lesson. It was a lot of fun for you guys. I'm going to leave you with a little of me playing the cover, and we'll be back next week with probably a simpler lesson. Nate for the 80/20 Drummer, it's been real. Peace. Check.